Conference. A very warm welcome back. Now, the highlight of the day, I hope, in welcoming in our Secretary of State, George Eustice. I am also delighted to welcome Farming Minister Victoria Prentice, who is sat in the front row as well. But without further ado, I would like to welcome George Eustice, Secretary of State, to give his keynote address to conference.
Well, Minette, thank you very much, and it is a real pleasure to be here again. The last time I stood on this stage addressing the NFU was 2 years ago, and of course since then we've had 2 years of extraordinary disruption with the COVID pandemic. And I wanted to, first of all, recognise the phenomenal efforts of the food and farming industry in helping us deal with that pandemic, particularly early on when we had that panic buying episode. The efforts of the industry to deal with some of the stresses and strains in the supply chain was truly extraordinary. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank both Minette and Terry and the whole team at the NFU for all of the work and engagement that they gave us during that difficult period and indeed since. And I also want to thank the NFU and Minette's team for the work that they've done working with Defra in helping to develop our future policy. Because this is an area that, despite the distractions of the pandemic, we have maintained some progress and have maintained the delivery of some of the changes that we want to see during the agricultural transition. And I know that this week, Minette has published the blueprint for the future of agriculture. And that blueprint document is absolutely right in terms of saying that food production and environmental protection must go hand in hand. I've always maintained that they are two sides of the same coin. We want sustainable agriculture, and we want to work with farmers to deliver some of the environmental ambitions that we have. Now, the context in which we operate is one of change. Agricultural commodity prices have always been driven principally by oil and gas prices and by exchange rates. And since 2016, we have seen some good, healthy rises in some of our commodity prices. Beef and lamb prices are pushing towards new highs. And more recently, we've also seen a welcome recovery in the prices of some of our cereal crops. Now, as a result of this, farm incomes have been boosted in recent years. Some of the changes that we've seen, of course, could be temporary. We know that these things go in cycles and that commodity prices may indeed fall again. But elements of that change may turn out to be more fundamental and more structural. After all, there's also a context in which we have a rising world population set to go to 9 billion by 2050, and a context in which climate change is going to mean that water scarcity becomes an issue in parts of the world, and parts of the world that have good and best and most versatile agricultural land today may find it harder to produce crops in future. And that means that the temperate regions of the world, including here in the UK, will find there is strong demand for the produce that they grow. But I also recognise that there are challenges, as ever, with agriculture. And associated with that high oil price and high gas price are some really sharp rises in input costs, big rises in fertilizer costs, energy costs rising, the cost of tractor fuel rising. I know that these costs will bite on the profit margin of businesses and will be weighing on the minds of many of you here today. And as ever, it's also the case in farming that not all sectors are on the up and enjoying good prices. Indeed, disruption to the markets in China has led to a very difficult time for our pig producers over the last 12 months or so. Now, last October, we responded to the demands of the industry that they wanted to have a private storage aid scheme so that they could increase Saturday kills to deal with the backlog, and that they wanted to have a temporary visa scheme as well. We put both of those in place. It is fair to say that the uptake of those has not been as good as we'd liked. but my colleague Victoria Prentice has been working very hard, both with the NFU and the MPA and the industry, to identify ways that we can improve that private storage aid scheme. And we're also very clear that we took powers in the Agriculture Act for a reason, to be able to bring fairness and transparency to supply chains. We've already acted to bring forward regulations in the dairy sector, and we are about to commence a review of the pig market sector with a view to using those powers in the Agriculture Act to ensure that there is fairness in the supply chain in future. Now, at the heart of our future agriculture policy is a wish to support the choices that individual farm enterprises make. We want to end the top-down rule book that we used to have from the EU, running to hundreds of pages of guidance, and instead have an approach that's much more modular, more optional, where farmers can actually choose what works for their own particular holding and their own particular enterprise, and can choose the level of ambition that they would like to adopt in each of those areas. And we've also been clear all along that we wanted the development of our policy to be iterative. We wanted the ability for it to adapt. We wanted the ability to respond to demand from farmers for those policies that work, and have the freedom to adjust those that needed further work. And that is why late last year, we opened the Farming Investment Fund and the Small Technology Grants with an initial pot of £17 million to support investment in farm productivity. Now, that fund was heavily oversubscribed. So today I can announce that we are increasing the fund for that small technology grant from £17 million to £48 million, which will enable around 4,000 applications from farmers to proceed successfully. And today I also want to say more about the animal health and welfare pathway. Our livestock sectors are world leading in many respects. We have exported animal genetics around the world down the decades. My own grandfather used to export prize-winning South Devon cattle as far afield as South Africa and United States and Australia and New Zealand. And to this day, we are still world leaders in animal genetics. We have Europe's largest sheep sector, and we're one of only 3 significant producers and exporters in the world. And we've got internationally competitive poultry and pig sectors. But we also know that the financial performance of all livestock enterprises is heavily linked to animal health. And the AHDB have previously done some quite detailed analysis on the costs of animal health problems and endemic diseases to our livestock sectors. And they found that it costs over £1 billion a year for those endemic diseases. Sheep scab alone costs over £8 million to the sheep sector. Lameness in sheep costs the sector £24 million a year. BVD is estimated to cost our cattle sectors between £40 and £60 million every year. And we also know that in dairy, good prevention of lameness and good management of conditions such as mastitis can significantly reduce costs by up to 15%. And work that's been done by Kingshay demonstrates that this equates to around £110 cost saving per cow if you can get those animal health outcomes right. Now, the AHDB, as I said, have done some really important analytical work here. I know that Nicholas Sapphire and his team are revisiting that work, and they are doing more work to update some of those figures. I think this is a crucial piece of work. You'll also all be aware that we are introducing some changes so that farmers can be much more directly engaged in the strategy and plans of AHDB sectors in the future. And I would encourage all of you to register with the AHDB if you're in those livestock sectors so that you can take part in their consultation for their next 5-year programme. But the animal health and welfare pathway is really for those farmers who are in the pursuit of higher profitability through better health outcomes. And it starts with an annual vet visit. Farmers will be able to have a vet of their choice, the family vet that they trust. And the government will pay between £372 and £684, depending on the species, because the costs of tests is different. in order to support an annual visit from that vet to the farmer. It'll remain confidential between the farmer and his vet, and that vet will be able to help a farmer put together a plan for improved animal health and improved profitability on their livestock holding. As part of that plan, it will include some diagnostic tests of key diseases. So in cattle, we are particularly interested in the first instance in targeting BVD. In sheep, there will be a drench test to test for resistance to certain wormers. And in pigs, we will be testing for PRRS, which is a growing problem in that particular sector. And this is just the first step, because once farmers engage with the animal health and welfare pathway, in future years, we intend to make available grant support, for instance, to improve ventilation or improve buildings and housing so that they can get higher outcomes, and also to support the intervention of particular approaches that we know will work. Now, we've always been clear that we want to change from the old system, the Common Agricultural Policy, to the new system in a gradual way. We want this to be an evolution, not a revolution. We've been clear about that from the start. The Agriculture Act actually sets out explicitly a 7-year transition period, and this will apply to every element of our policy. So on the sustainable farming incentive, as you know, we've already announced as a first step a soil health module where farmers can be rewarded for having green cover crops over winter and for doing basic things such as soil analysis of each of their areas and each of their soils. In future years, we will add modules on hedgerows, on integrated pest management, and we will also provide the opportunity for farmers to do more within each of those modules. So I hear it said sometimes that the payment in this first year is a small payment and a first step. And indeed, that is exactly what it is, the first step. And I know that there are people who would like it to go faster and to be able to have more of those modules sooner. But you have to understand that the only way we could do that would be to cut the BPS payment faster than we already are. And I'm not sure that is the right thing to do, given that we've always promised people that 7-year transition. But we do recognise that there are farmers who want to move faster and embrace things faster. And that is why we have also increased payment rates in countryside stewardship by 30% on average. And we are encouraging those farmers not already in countryside stewardship to engage with that programme. And it gives them the opportunity to engage with the schemes more ambitiously than the SFI might enable them to. And we envisage that countryside stewardship will become a stepping stone to local nature recovery. And it will be very easy for farmers to convert their countryside stewardship agreements in future to a future LNR scheme. And we already have 40,000 farmers engaged in countryside stewardship. There was a 40% increase in demand last year. For those of you not engaged, I would encourage you to get involved. So I believe there's a bright future for agriculture. And for our part in Defra, we are committed to designing our future policy with industry. We put in place this principle of co-design with groups of technical experts in each area working with us to design the future policies as we put them in place. We know we won't get everything right in the first step, and that is why maintaining that ability to adapt and to have an iterative change to policy is also very important. But I believe there is a bright future for our agriculture. We can be internationally competitive. The government wants to support farmers towards that more profitable future and to deliver many of those objectives set out in the NFU's Blueprint for the Future. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's really to be warmly welcomed, the uplift on the Farm Investment Fund. I think that was 4 times oversubscribed. So an increase to 48 million is certainly really to be welcomed. And your thoughts on animal welfare, I think we've got lots and lots of questions, which I'm keen to come on to. But I guess what I wanted to raise with you, first of all, was what I picked up in my speech. I mean, I know for the growers in this audience, and all of our phones have been going all weekend as to what landed from the Home Office with Labour providers on Friday. And really, enormous appreciation. I know you get this inside out, and you have done more than anyone. You've managed to bring in ornamentals to the SOARS scheme. We've got the uplift of another 10,000 to take it to 40,000. And we know that you get how much we need foreign nationals to supplement our domestic workforce so that UK growers do actually remain competitive. But we are hearing rumours, and as I say, this email went out to Labour providers, and it said that seasonal workers must be paid a salary equivalent to £12.31 per hour, which is almost a 40% wage increase. And there will be businesses here who will be looking at potentially 2 million and some £4 million of increase on top of the inflation that we are already facing. You and I touched on it briefly out there, and you seem very surprised at that. So I guess the question is, how do we work together to make sure that, you know, this is a slip up, a mistake, and isn't actually the case? And the sort of, I think, the public commitment from you that it will be the £10.10 per hour that have been always originally what was quoted. Can you try and give the audience a bit more detail on what happened?
The simple answer is, and I worked in the soft fruit sector myself, by its very nature, seasonal work doesn't run for the entire year. And that is why, even on our minimum wage legislation that we had previously, and the national living wage since, we based it on an hourly calculation. Because somebody doing seasonal work might only work part-time, might work 3 days a week, might work for a month, might work for 6 months. And that is why, when you judge these things, the only viable way to do it is to look at an hourly rate. And we were also clear, and I agreed this with the Home Office at the time, that because we do want in the longer term to be able to create more employment opportunities for people in this country and to encourage more into this sector, we didn't want to undermine the labour market. And growers have repeatedly told me that they don't want access to cheap labour, they want access to labour who will do the work. And as somebody who ran a strawberry enterprise, I entirely understand that. So what we agreed is that the hourly rate should be set at something higher than the national living wage, maybe about 10% higher than the national minimum wage. And in the end, the figure that was alighted on was £10.10 per hour. So there is going to be a requirement for a minimum payment of £10.10 an hour. Having talked to a lot of growers, I didn't judge that to be in itself a particular barrier, for the simple reason that most of them tell me that the people they have working for them typically earn between £12 and £15, sometimes more per hour at the moment. But it's got to be if it's a minimum rate, you have to set it at a realistic level. Otherwise, you start to have to performance manage off staff who you might otherwise be able to retain. So it's £10.10 an hour is what the agreement was. And what I'll do is take away from this, if there's been some error in the guidance, we'll obviously get that corrected.
But it's a real sign of the times that, you know, we have not been able to meet with Home Office in a way that I would have liked. I have never met with the Secretary of State, Priti Patel, in her current job. Kevin Forster has been enormously challenging, as when I've seen you give evidence, I think you have found as well. Again, he has not been engaging. And I find it unforgivable, the fact that, you know, you are basically assuring this audience that we are going to be sticking with the £10.10, and yet that missive went out to the Labour providers. And imagine what that has done to these growers who face such uncertainty, you know, this escalating inflation. And how do we collectively resolve this issue? Because it gets worse instead of better. I mean, we will come on to the pig situation, but it is an untenable situation if this is just a mistake, which let's hope it is.
Well, look, sometimes after a policy is agreed, officials will draft guidance. Occasionally they will make errors in that. Obviously, it's regrettable when that happens, but all I can say is the policy we've got is clear. There is going to be a higher minimum wage than the national living wage for those who come in under the seasonal workers scheme, and that'll be £10.10 an hour. And we will ensure that any clarification that's needed is given.
Well, if that could happen as urgently as possible, it would be enormously appreciated. Can I have John Longmire and Andrew Ward who've pre-submitted questions. Can they come to the microphone, please? Just in the interest of time, while they make their way to the microphone, the situation in the pig industry, you didn't hear my speech at the beginning, and very grateful to Farming Minister Victoria Prentice for hosting that emergency summit last week. But I receive the most heartbreaking emails on this subject. I received an email last night from a family who don't want to be named, but ultimately they have invested well over £1 million in the last 5 years. They are producing effectively store pigs to be sold under contract at 50 kilograms. They've been in business for 52 years. Their son has just done and got an agricultural degree to come back and work in the business. And with a situation of 200,000 pigs on contract, backed up on farm, they have taken the decision to cull 4,700 sows. Their son has had to go out and find a job. And what do I say to that email that I've got to reply to? Are you going, as other countries have done, give support to those farmers who are losing their livelihood purely because we have changed our immigration policy on leaving the EU? Are you going to look at that?
Well, look, coming back to the challenge here, when I've talked to some of the leading pork processors, they've actually pointed predominantly to disruption in the market in China that has actually affected demand for their product and caused problems. But we did, as I say, in October, have a temporary visa scheme for butchers to enable them to bring people over. That wasn't subscribed as much as we would have liked. Some of them also took the skilled route, which obviously is also welcome and an option that they have. And they also asked us for a private storage aid scheme and said that if we opened one, they would run Saturday kills to clear the backlog and put that into storage, or indeed put it on an overseas market. And again, sadly, that didn't happen in the way that we understood the industry would react. That's the processing industry. So we have now convened further meetings. Victoria Prentice has been working very closely with industry on this. They have now requested some tweaks to the way the private storage aid works so that they could sell some of the higher value cuts from the loin, but then actually be able to put the rest of the carcass into cold store. That's something that we are looking at making a change to facilitate. But crucially here as well, this is a sector that is dominated by really 4 very large processors. We know from our experience in dairy what can happen in such situations. And that's why I think it's really important that we look at the way this market works, look at the issue of transparency and fairness, because we want a market that works properly. And if farmers have got contracts that are not being respected, then we may need to bring forward some regulations to be able to take further steps in this area.
But at this emergency summit, even the processors were quite clear that actually the direct aid needed to go to the pig farmers themselves. Are you going to look at that?
Well, at the moment, the reality is that what we need to do, and it's about a 1 week backlog in total. It's about 160,000 pigs. I know the NFU put it slightly higher, but the best estimate we've got is around 162,000 pigs. That's about 1 week's production. So it's a significant backlog, but one that could be dealt with if only those processors would press ahead, run those Saturday slaughters to get on top of this. It would require farmers to take a lower price in the short term in order to clear that backlog, but it would then get the market back into balance. And we know that while in the last year, pig production in the UK has increased by about 7%, responding to increased demand, responding to expectations on the Chinese market that did not in the end materialize, we know that since the autumn, they've been scaling back their production again. And so production and supply is likely to come back into balance in the early part of this summer.
Mm. But that still doesn't do it. I don't see how I'm helped in replying to that email. And that contraction, already 10% of the national pig herd will only be contracting further. They take out 4,700. I know of many other pig farmers who are doing the same. So it then just sucks in imports produced to lower standards. We have a world-leading pig industry. We're probably one of the only outdoor producers of pig meat. We've got retailers who've committed to 100% British. You can't fulfill that demand. And this is far from over. And I beg you that we can sort this out. And this family, they have written to you 3 times and they've not had a reply. They've written to the farming minister twice and they've not had a reply. She got a reply from me late last night, but these are real businesses, and I'm finding it really tough myself to fail to get this point to land. You know, the Prime Minister promised me, I'd rather die, he said, than hurt Britain's farmers. Well, these pig farmers are hurting, and they're going out of business, and we've got to act. John Longmire.
Madam President, John Longmire, North West Livestock Board. I would just like to ask the Secretary of State of Agriculture, his transition plan he outlined earlier from BPS to the new environmental schemes. The harsh reality is Hill and Upland farms will lose over 50% of their critical direct payment support by December 2024. I know some of this will be recoverable through the SFI and countryside stewardship payments, but most farmers, as he knows, are already part of these organisations and partnerships. As SFI 2020 payments are only 10% of direct payments, will the Secretary of State take urgent steps to introduce new SFI standards in the uplands to increase HLS payment and review again the countryside stewardship payment rates?
We're looking at all of these things is the short answer. On one level, the uplands are probably better placed than some of our arable lowlands to benefit from the new schemes because there's more that they could do by way of the environmental payments. It's easier for them to engage in some of those schemes. A lot of the options that we have for nature's recovery in some ways lend themselves better to the uplands areas. But it's also the case that some of those severely disadvantaged areas and moorland areas also are already often quite heavily invested in HLS schemes or higher tier countryside stewardship. And although we've currently, in a first step, revised a lot of the payment rates on the mid-tier countryside stewardship, which is a big boost to the 40,000 farmers that are already in that scheme, because we've not yet done the same on HLS agreements, and we've not done it for capital items for obviously a very good reason. I am conscious that that creates a particular issue for some of the upland areas. So I have asked our officials to look closely at this, with a view to seeing what we can do on payment rates on the new schemes to ensure that there's a viable future for our upland farmers.
And have we got Andrew Ward at a microphone, and then Sam Godfrey as well, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Secretary of State, I'd like to just touch on trading standards with you, please, if I may, on import standards. Over a year ago, Michael Gove was on Countryfile, interviewed by Tom Heap, and he promised that import standards would match our own standards of food production. And he promised that. And quite clearly, with what is happening at the moment, with the trade deal you've done with Australia, with the sugar quota extension you've done, allowed that to come in, those countries can still use paraquat. This was banned here in 2003. So I would actually think you have gone against your word, and I could wonder if you could please explain why.
So on the trade deal with Australia, we have an SPS chapter that sets out our standards. And so on those livestock sectors, the ban that we have on hormones in beef remains in place. The ban that we have on washes on poultry, such as chlorine or others, remains in place. And they'll have to meet those standards in order to be able to access our market. Now, on the fringes of that, of course, there are some issues, some practices that have not yet been banned in Australia. So mulesing is one example. It has been banned in New Zealand, mainly due to British consumer pressure and retail pressure in the UK. And I know that Australia are moving in that direction. But then there are other areas and on other measures where in some ways, when it comes to, for instance, standards at slaughter, Australia and New Zealand are sometimes judged to have slightly higher standards than ours. So generally speaking, if you look at our animal welfare outcomes, there's a high degree of equivalence between the UK and Australia. When it comes to hormones in beef and some of the beef lot systems that they would have on beef in Australia, that wouldn't be the case, and that's why we've kept in place that ban on hormones. And we've also recognised that because these are sensitive sectors, we should, in fact, put in place staging towards liberalisation. We've put in place 15 years staging with a special agricultural safeguard that kicks in between years 10 and 15. And recognising that their animal welfare standards on pork and on poultry in particular are very low and unacceptable, we've refused to do any tariff liberalisation on those particular sectors.
But rather than the countries, rather than waiting for Australia to match our standards, surely why don't you wait for us to catch up and to do these trade deals when they have got in line with us rather than the other way around?
Well, all I would say is we obviously do want to do trade agreements, and while there are very few opportunities for British agriculture in markets like Australia, we do have offensive interests in a number of other markets that we are pursuing, particularly in Asia, possibly even in countries like India, which we're looking at the moment, but China, Japan in particular have a lot of opportunities for us. The United States, although it's always held up as a particular threat on some sectors, actually has a lot of opportunities for our dairy sector. And indeed, leading companies like Omsco, which leads the British organic milk sector, has been particularly successful in markets like the United States. So there are opportunities in some markets. We've got defensive interests coming from others such as Australia. But I think that overall, the package we put in place with that liberalisation, with no liberalisation on sectors like pigs and poultry, demonstrates that we've protected those standards.
But we've given them, haven't we? I mean, I think the trouble is that Australia is a precedent deal. It's the first free trade agreement that we've agreed. You know that throughout your time, and you've stood up, and I know at the cabinet table you voted for it, that you wanted to have long-term opportunities of safeguards, that if something did go wrong, we could do something. And ultimately, you and Michael Gove and others were overruled at the cabinet table. And so we do not have sensitive sectors forever and a day. 15 years, we will be fully liberalised. And I guess, the point that Andrew makes, how can you assure this audience that those future deals, we've seen that one, we then saw New Zealand demanding the exact same. They are the only two fully liberalised countries themselves, mainly because they're big exporters of agricultural products and they have small populations. We, on the other hand, are what I would say is the most prized food market in the world with 60 million people. And everybody wants access to this food market. So we gave it away on a plate to Australia. And how does that leave us as we negotiate these further trade deals? And my biggest worry, as you know, was always that we would be effectively a pawn agriculture on the back of a service-based economy. And with all we have to go on to date, that is how it looks.
Well, look, on all trade agreements, obviously they're not like joining the EU, which was in many ways seen as an irrevocable step at the time. And as we've learned over the last 4 years, quite difficult to extract yourself from. In all modern trade deals, they end with a very simple termination clause. And it's very hard to predict the future. My judgment is that in 15 years, there will be lots of other issues affecting global commodity prices. The market may have changed quite considerably because of climate change, because of land that can produce food today not being able to in the future. It's hard to predict this. You can only make the best judgment available to you on the evidence that you've got. And that's why we put in place that 15-year staging, put in place a special agricultural safeguard that automatically kicks in at a particular volume after year 10, should there be a sharp increase. But crucially, you've always got the opportunity with trade agreements of this sort to renegotiate them in the future.
Yes, via the WTO. Anyway, we've got a huge...
No, not via the WTO. It's a standard clause in all trade agreements. We even have one with the European Union agreement we have now, that you can terminate them with 6 months' notice in writing.
Well, I look forward to that engagement with Commissioner George Brandis in the audience if that needs to happen. If we could move on, I make no apologies for bringing Sam Godfrey back in, who may well be repeating a lot of what I have already said. But Sam, over to you.
Indeed, thank you, Secretary of State. I know the President's already taken you to task on the situation in the pig sector. The past year has been the toughest in a generation for pig farmers, culminating in tens of thousands of healthy pigs culled and disposed of. No other country has been through quite that dire a situation, and there's a clear evidence of market failure because these are contracted pigs that have not been taken by those parties contracted to take them. The interventions brought in to resolve the issue were not quite those asked for by the industry. They were based on our asks, but they were not addition to the shortage list, addition of butchers to the shortage list of occupations, which would have been the obvious thing to have done. Given the failure of design of those schemes has pushed the sector to the brink, I wondered if, again, I could ask you to consider using the new and significant powers under the Agriculture Act to compensate those hardest hit directly, those producers, rather than elsewhere in the supply chain, as is happening in many other pig-producing countries, including even relatively small countries like the Republic of Ireland's €7 million scheme announced this morning.
Before you answer that, I'm going to ask Ollie Harrison and James Woodhouse to please find their way to the microphones. Secretary of State.
Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, on pigs, the reality here is yes, in answer to your question around markets, this is a market that is dominated by 4 very large processors. And we've had a lot of meetings with both them and with pig farmers and the MPA and others and retailers to try to get to the bottom of this problem. As often is the case, it's complex. To be fair to the processors, they will say, and correctly say, that farmers increased pig production by 7% in the last year. And they've actually increased their rate of slaughtering by between 1 and 2%. So they've slaughtered more pigs in the last year than they did the year before. And they've managed to do that. But because pig production has increased by 7%, there has been this overhang that has been a problem now for at least the last 6 to 9 months. In terms of what we should do about it, I think there is an issue that pigs that have been contracted to be taken have not been taken, and that the tools that we offered to processors to try and expedite that and enable them to fulfill their contractual obligations haven't yet been taken. That's why we do need to look at this market. We took those powers in the Agriculture Act for very good reason, because I've consistently said that if farmers received a fairer pay for the food that they produce, and if they weren't just price takers on the end of the line, and they had a fairer share of the value chain for what they produced, then we will all have to worry less about subsidies and area payments and so forth. And that is why, yes, we will be looking at this market with a view to bringing forward regulations under the Agriculture Act to try to strengthen and improve transparency in this particular market. And on your point on labour, I disagree with you slightly, because we did look at this at the time. Adding butchers to the shortage occupation list would have made no difference whatsoever, because all the shortage occupation list enables you to do is pay skilled workers a slightly lower rate of pay. Now, some of the processors have successfully been bringing butchers in under the skilled route. That's always been open to them. They've always been able to bring butchers in under the skilled route, provided they pay them in the region of £25,000 per year. They would like to bring in more, but they've been able to attract more. So actually putting them on the shortage occupation list so you could cut their pay and offer them even less wouldn't actually have helped. So the right thing to have done, which is what we did, was to open a temporary visa scheme along the lines of the seasonal agricultural worker scheme. It was the quickest, simplest way to try to get people here. It's still not been particularly easy to attract people into this work for a relatively short period of time, but it was the best way to try to deliver that increased number of butchers that were needed.
I don't necessarily disagree with you, but the timing, we were flagging this up in meetings back in April, as was the MPA, and it took until the autumn, the late autumn. We got the visa scheme for hauliers and poultry. It seemed to really resonate with number 10, that if you couldn't have a turkey, Christmas was going to be a disaster. But for the pig industry, it ultimately was too little, too late. That has been the challenge, and it has been, you know, were we still members of the EU, we would not be in the situation we are now. And I think the lessons we've got to learn for it is that we've got to plan for these crises so we don't just keep walking into them. That's the sort of key point in all of this. It was the timing of it. And again, that isn't down to you. That is down to the Home Office, who we just got this blanket pushback from. They wouldn't engage. So it was too little that came in too late for it ultimately to be resolved.
Well, we were getting quite mixed messages, actually, from the processing sector. During the
Not
summer.
for the primary producers, you
No, so all meat processors, whatever sector they're in, whether it's lamb, poultry, or indeed pork, you know, we're obviously reporting in common with many other sectors a shortage of labour, a very tight labour market, and that was being experienced right across the economy. So there was nothing particularly unique there. And indeed, Cranswick were telling me as recently as September that actually the really big stress point for them was disruption in the Chinese market. And if we were able to fix that, which I'm afraid has also remained quite elusive for complex political reasons, but if we were able to resolve that, then they would be in a much stronger position to deal with this situation. Now, as soon as it became apparent that there was a backlog, and that actually what we really needed to do was to try to get some extra butchers in, and it was judged to be actually no more than around 800 that were needed, we put in place a temporary scheme to do that. But the uptake of it's not been as high as we had expected, given the demand that we were told was there.
I could go on, English language requirement and all sorts of other things. Anyway, we'll park that for the time being. Ollie Harrison, please. We can.
I spoke to you at the Fringe event in Manchester about fertiliser, because it was at the time that the urea the urea was under threat. Since then now, we've got no access hardly to any AN. And without chemical fertilisers, we're talking of a 60% reduction in yields, which isn't obviously good for food security. With all now what's been happening in the Ukraine and Russia, have Defra or you got a plan for fertiliser security?
We've been looking at this. Obviously, we do have one significant fertiliser manufacturing plant in the UK, but they had suspended production recently and are currently operating not at full tilt, and that's obviously got consequences for our carbon dioxide supplies as well. But yes, the short answer is the availability of ammonium nitrate in particular is very closely linked to gas prices, and the price of ammonium nitrate is always going to have that close link to gas prices. Longer term, and this links to our future agriculture policy, I think that this spike in fertiliser prices will cause more farmers to think carefully about where they get their fertilisers from. We could see more people looking at different technologies to use organic fertilisers, farmyard manures, maybe...
All the things that farming rolls for water banned.
Where's it going to come from, though?
They are sometimes used in the wrong place, but there's also growing use of crops like Phacelia, green fertilisers, and in some of our grasslands, clover mixes and so on coming back into fashion. So I think we will see more people going in that direction. But I'm also aware that we've been working closely with the industry on urea in particular. And there's some quite interesting proposals about how we might find a middle way through there that helps us deliver some of our air quality objectives while also enabling urea to continue to be used.
Yeah, we've got a 300% increase, though, with inputs of fertiliser, 200% increase. You know, it needs a little bit more than the fairy tale of, oh, it's all right, we'll use more cow muck or we'll use more. It's not there. It's not getting wasted. It's just simply not available.
Yeah, well... Look, I've acknowledged there's a global market in gas. As we pass peak oil and gas prices rise, you know, these sorts of problems are going to be more of an issue. And that's why we do have to look at alternatives to products that are ultimately derived from gas.
But the important point that you make, and Emma Howard-Boyd will be speaking here tomorrow, you know, when we look at the RPS on farming rules for water and effectively the banning of spreading all the things that you were talking about, which is in total conflict with the SFI in the autumn, when surely that is the time to be spreading onto mulch in the early autumn. digestate onto a growing crop. Why wouldn't we, rather than on bare ground in February? And this is where I think a lot of the frustration in this room will be felt of the join-up of the policy to lead to this optimisation of agriculture that we all want to see, effectively the detail in the scheme.
Well, look, we've already been clear that we will issue guidance under Section 15 of the Farming Rules for Water to the Environment Agency about exactly how they should interpret those rules. Those particular regulations were born out of an infraction risk from the EU some 5 years ago, and it was judged at the time that the best way to deal with that in a way that worked for industry was to put an existing voluntary code that industry had, that the NFU supported, onto a statutory footing in order to see off a typical piece of EU litigation, the source of which was quite normal. Now, what's happened since then is when you look at particularly the first clause of the Farming Rules for Water, sorry to bore you with the detail, but it matters
carry on.
These. Clause 1 actually is quite ambiguous. And it's ambiguous, and it's okay when it's ambiguous if it's in guidance, but as soon as you put it in regulation, that becomes problematic. That is why what we need to do now is issue very clear guidance to the Environment Agency about how they should interpret it. That's what we'll do. Victoria Prentice is working with the industry at the moment to develop what that guidance should be, and it'll be published in the spring.
So that sounds to me like you are saying, now we've left the EU, the EA will be fully accountable to Parliament, you will be dictating the policy to them, and they will be delivering it.
The EA is always accountable, and we have an explicit power in the Farming Rules for Water to be able to issue statutory guidance to them about how to carry out their functions on this particular set of regulations.
Okay, so one mistake with the Home Office, another mistake with the EA, but anyway, you're on it, so that's good.
It is not a mistake. Well, it's not a mistake, it's an ambiguity in the regulation, and we owe it. We owe it to the Environment Agency as the ministers to be able to explain how they should interpret that.
I have a different code for that with my children, as I'm sure you will with your daughter when she's older. But anyway, moving on to James Woodhouse, please. And we are getting short on time, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Madam President. Unfortunately, James can't be with us today, but it's Chris Cardell, Chairman of Tenants Forum, and I know what James's question was going to be. George, you probably know, as I'm stood up here, it's going to be a tenants question. Minette emphasised today in her keynote speech around the difficulties around how everything's got to be fair for tenants going forward. You and I are a couple of Cornish boys here. I'll ask a straightforward Cornish question and hope I'll get a straightforward Cornish answer. I'll take you back a little bit to a meeting that we both attended some years ago down at Smugglers Inn. You came along, spoke to some of your local farmers only a couple of miles down the road from where you live, or your parents' farm. There you outlined quite in depth your aims and aspirations for the tenanted sector, for the next generation, and how, if we came out of Brexit, what you hope to be in power to be able to do. Since then, you've moved on. You are in power. Those aspirations were that you wanted the tenanted sector to be on an equal footing with everybody else, to get the same payments, that people investing in money coming in, just taking the BPS, would not be supported in future, and that everybody would have a playing field. The youth would be encouraged to come in via the tenanted sector. Here we are now, some time down the line, where we are still seeing some county farms unfortunately selling their farms. Less opportunities coming in for the youngsters to get in, because basically the tenanted sector is finding itself in great difficulties because the payments as they stand at the moment are encouraging landlords to take land back out of the sector. That land coming out of the sector then means that there is less in the marketplace and more competition. So you told us at that time rents were coming down. I haven't seen any sign of rents coming down. We have the pleasure of meeting with Minister Prentice last week, and you formed the working group with Baroness Rock. We welcome the chance to be part of that. But you recalled Trigg some 4 years or more ago. We went into great detail what the opportunities were and what some of the disadvantages were in the tenanted sector at that time. All that detail's on your table, has been on your table for some time. So can I ask you what you're going to do now to support the tenanted sector to make it an even playing field for everybody involved and not to lose land out of the sector, hampering both businesses' expansion, continuation of businesses and opportunities for the youth coming forward?
Yeah. Well, Thank you, and good to see Cornwall represented. I had a sort of misspent youth in the Smugglers Inn in my days of young farmers, and I do remember that meeting well. And in answer to your key point on the tenanted sector, we introduced some provisions in the Agriculture Act that made it clear that the tenanted sector would be able to access the new schemes and to prevent landlords putting in covenants that would prevent them from doing so. And we worked with Trig at the time, the Tenancy Reform Industry Group, to come up with a package of other quite complex technical measures around reforms of AHAs in particular that were put in place through the Agriculture Act. Since then, I've recently set up a working group under Baroness Rock, who is herself a tenant farmer, and we've put together a working group to consider further how we can ensure that the tenanted sector can benefit from the new schemes. And benefiting from them may be that we create obligations that they are contractually involved in any work that goes on the land. And it is possible, in my view, that we could develop partnership type agreements, joint ventures between tenants and landowners on some of the work that goes on that particular landscape. There's then the issue of access to land, which I've always been passionate about. And one of the things we know from all of the detailed work that's been done on this, both in Cornwall through the Fresh Start initiative, as it was then called, and a project in Wales as well. If you want to create opportunities for new entrants coming in, particularly in the tenanted sector, you've also got to help an older generation retire with dignity and support them to retire so that you create access to land for a new generation coming through. And that's why we've announced, for instance, a voluntary exit scheme to support those who do want to retire to be able to do so with dignity. And in doing so, that will free up more land to be rented and create new opportunities for new entrants. And later this year, we'll be saying more about a new entrant scheme to support new entrants into that land so that it's not just neighbouring farms that expand, although a little bit of that doesn't do any harm, but that you also create a pipeline of new opportunities as well for the next generation of farmers coming through. So we have done some changes already through the Agriculture Act. There is more to come, and we've got a working group looking at this in more detail.
Thank you. I'm going to have to pull the questions in the audience to a close, but just a couple of thoughts from me. I mean, Chris is right, and you have done a lot for the tenanted sector over your time. But when I look at the breakdown of the budget of, effectively 35, 35, 35, 35% of the budget, and you were very outspoken when we left the EU about very large landowners pulling down large sums of money. How then can you justify 35% of the budget going into less than 5% of land that will go into a minority of landowners and will be, I would say, pretty much impossible for tenants to get into?
Well, that's not what we're saying. The first thing to bear in mind, people get way too hung up on this, in my view.
That's because we're desperate for the detail.
Well, this isn't like EU days of pillars, where you had pillar 1 and you had pillar 2, and there was fixed cash in each, and you agonize over so-called modulation about whether you could move money from one to the other. Those days are gone. This is an indicative thing that we've said, that we've broadly got 3 types of schemes that have got broadly 3 types of objectives. But there's no hard boundary between them. There's no hard budget allocation to any of them. It's actually a continuum from one end of the scale to the next. And on the sustainable farming incentive, that is there to support sustainable farming practices, good soil stewardship, integrated pest management, sensitive management of hedgerows. Moving through, you've then got the local nature recovery element, which will be similar to countryside stewardship, making space for nature on part of the farms. And then at the other end, you've got more landscape scale projects. Now, some of that could be woodland creation, some of that could be peatland restoration, but a lot of it could be things like silvopasture, agroforestry, more trees in the landscape. And actually, probably most of the severely disadvantaged area and the moorland area would find themselves eligible in some way for what we eventually bring forward under what's currently called landscape recovery. But look, if we have more demand for schemes under the sustainable farming incentive, and those are delivering our environmental objectives, we won't hesitate to put more of the budget into that. And likewise, if there is more for the second part, the local nature recovery strategy, we won't hesitate to put more money into that. It's not a fixed allocation. And I think people have got to get out of this sort of old EU mindset of thinking about fixed things and fixed rules. That's not how we're approaching it.
Well, that's good to hear, because the CLA, lovely to see Mark Tufnell here as their president, I think George Dunn from the TFA. The NFU led a sustainable farming incentive white paper that you very kindly thanked us all for, and it had the CLA, TFA and ourselves absolutely unanimous that 65% as a minimum of the budget should be in the SFI. So if we've got this new flexible approach, can you commit to that? Because I'm with you. I want to get 70% of farmers in England onto that platform, but they can't get onto that platform if it's an unprofitable one. So would you look at putting 65%, as the whole industry requested, into the SFI?
As I said, these aren't pillars, and I'm not going to put fixed cash into certain things. They will be demand-led. Now, we've opened the first stage of the sustainable farming incentive. We aim over time to get maybe up to 70% engagement. We definitely won't get that in year one. A bit like the old ELS scheme, we may get limited uptake for the first 1 or 2 years, and then hopefully a higher uptake of around 70% towards the end. And if there's more demand faster, we'll put more money in it faster. If there isn't the demand, and actually what people conclude is they like the 30% increase in countryside stewardship, and they're going to just go for that, and that's their choice, we'll make sure that we fund that. Just as I've increased the funding in the Farming Investment Fund to support applications because the demand was there, I didn't just say to thousands of people, no, sorry, we've only got 17 million fixed in that. We increased the budget. And if there's a demand for SFI, we'll increase the budget for it. If there's a demand for countryside stewardship, we'll increase the budget for that instead.
But surely the other way of looking at it is if it was well-resourced, the demand, you would then get farmers queuing up to go on it.
Well, no.
Well, they think so.
Well, it's the responsibility of government. We've set ourselves some quite ambitious environmental targets. The crucial one is around species abundance and to halt the decline in nature by 2030. We will only hit that target if we get some changes across the whole farmed landscape that give us improvements in water quality, and therefore less nutrient pollution on our protected sites, and to get us higher levels of soil health so that we can get a recovery in biodiversity and more space for nature on farms so that we can see a return of farmland birds. We will only get there if we get an uptake of things like the sustainable farming incentive and countryside stewardship on a good scale. And it's the responsibility of government to set the price at a level that farmers will engage with. It is not for us, EU style, to put some shoveled amount of fixed cash in and then tell people that they're not eligible, they can't have it because we've run out of the fixed budget that was put in there. That's just not the way to do it. It should be demand-led, and we should design schemes that deliver our targets and deliver our outcomes and work with those farmers for whom that makes sense.
But that will read to this audience like we want a pretty park at home and we'll import our food if we're not going to be really working collaboratively together on the optimization of food production.
Well, it shouldn't. It shouldn't read like that, because what it actually means is the sustainable farming incentive, as its name suggests, is about farming, but farming sustainably. Perhaps farming with reduced fertilizer use, better use of green cover to reduce soil erosion, more emphasis on soil health, more emphasis on soil rotation, the use of integrated pest management, the animal health and welfare pathway to improve the profitability of livestock enterprises. All of that is about farm profitability and food production. And even within countryside stewardship, soon to become the local nature recovery component, the emphasis is really on taking the less productive bits of the farm and maybe putting them down to woodland or water features. It's not about wholesale change of farming practice in those particular areas.
Just one more thing. I could go on for a lot longer, as I'm sure many could, but we don't have a horticultural scheme. We don't have a moorland scheme. We've got a huge amount of uncertainty out there. And you talk about these technical advisors. Who are these technical people that will be providing the advice, and where are they?
So which technical advisors?
Well, the technical people that you referred to as providing advice on
Oh, right. Well, they are farmers who know what they're doing.
So they'll be providing advice to others.
It's co-design. It's the process of co-design. It's quite novel. One of my officials first told me about it. I said, this sounds a bit like a new word for consultation because you think that bit's discredited. But actually, it's something very different to that. In each of these areas, with each of these policies, we've actually drawn together groups of farmers who actually are practitioners who know what they're doing, and we brought them right in on the policy process to help us design it. That's how we've come up with the animal health and welfare pathway. It's actually how we came up with a sustainable farming incentive as well. And it is, I think, the right way to go. And with all of us, Defra and farmers working together, of course we won't get everything right. Of course we'll have to tweak things. Of course errors will be made. But I think the principle of working together on this and refining it as we go forward is the way to go.
We're going to have to pull it to a close. I think all I'd say in conclusion, I know you won't have liked this, and you probably won't like me on the back of it. And I will have some people in here who will say, you are far too gentle, and some people who will say, you went far too far, and some people might just be happy enough. I mean, that's the world that you and I live in to a certain extent. But, you know, what I would say is we can't carry on how we are at the moment. We can't carry on just careering into these crises. It's bad for your health, it's certainly bad for my health, and it's probably not great for our Prime Minister either, with everything else that he's got on his plate. We've got to come to a place, like the Australians, of partnership, whereby it is about partnership and we are working together. I think this adversarial approach is unsustainable. It doesn't deliver anything for anyone. And I just urge you to rethink on the SFI. You have a united industry, a totally united industry that wants to work with you, that wants to make a success of that scheme. I believe we can do it. I don't believe you should get any money if you're not doing anything. And I believe the more you do, the more you should be paid for doing it. And I think that's fair, a points-based approach, which the whole industry signed up to. So we want to work with you. We want to back you. I personally know you're a great friend to this industry. They might not be feeling that right now, but I know you are. And we want to shape a new future, and we want to do it together. So, George, I very much speak to you as your friend and collaborator. I want to change things, but things do need to change. They're not in the right place at the moment. Conference, please, will you thank the Secretary of State?